Instructor in the Department of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at UBC, and he's also the chair of Vantage College at UBC as well. Given that he's from Vancouver, we ordered up some snow for him for his visit to Winnipeg. And I've got two little biographies, the one that he wrote and the one I found online, and they're remarkably concordant. So Brett has received his bachelor's and his master's degree from Simon Fraser in geography, earth, and ocean sciences. And the two other things, or three things I wanted to mention. So one is he is a recipient of the UBC Killam Teaching Prize, which was nominated by students for excellence in teaching. The second thing is that he's been a key participant in the Carl Wyman Institute at UBC. And the third thing is that he's really one of the pioneers of the two-stage exam format. And that's what he's going to tell us about today, two-stage exams learning together.
Great, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming here on the Friday of a long weekend and spending your time with me here. I will try to make it worth your while. I'm going to just jump in, I think. I wanted to start by saying that this talk, a large part of it was contributed by a good colleague of mine named Joss Ives, who teaches in the physics department, who was also a colleague in the Carl Wyman Science Education Initiative. So I wanted to give him some credit for this as well. But I want to just dive in by showing you a video. Most, if not all of you, teach, which means you're all expert teachers. And I want to start with letting you watch this video. What it is a two-stage exam, an individual exam, then followed by a group exam. And my question is, what do you notice as instructors? What's important to you, and what things do you think are important? I will point out in this one that this guy here who's asleep actually got quite a good mark. He was just done the exam early. But watch and see what you see. So in a second, I'll walk around the camera. You get a little closer look. I'd say a snide comment about the back of the class, but this was actually the group that got the highest mark. So what I'd like you to do now is just turn to someone near you and have a quick discussion. What things did you observe in that video? What stood out for you? Go ahead. I should also point out two things. One, I can see you if you're not talking to anybody. You too. So you might want to move because there's going to be more discussion. That's one thing. That's good enough. What do people think? Does anyone have a thought about what they saw there that stands out for them? Yeah? Lots of intense discussion. Very intense discussion. Yes. What else? Yeah? I think it was near the end, and I think they were trying to go back and forth. But there were a fair number of diagrams, and probably I had questions that gave away the answers to others. I'm not sure. Other thoughts? Very noisy, yeah. Scares some people. I love it. Maybe I'm a little weird. Other thoughts? Yeah, most people were engaged. Now, this is an interesting thing for me, and I've told this story a few times today. I've done this now with more than 12,000 students, probably close to 13,000 students. I have found in that time 2 students who were not participating. 2. And they were in the same group. And I walked up to the group and I said, "What's going on, guys?" And they were 2 football players doing this. And they literally said, they're smarter than us. And I said to the smarter ones, groups of 2 do statistically better than groups of 4. And I walked away. And they sat up and started participating. That's crazy. I said it to the smarter ones. Oh, yeah, sorry. Groups of 4 do, groups of 2 do worse than 4, is what I said, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, they started participating. And so it's not just that you didn't find any. I've been searching actively for them, and I've found 2. So that's a little crazy. Anything else people saw? They were relaxed. Yeah, that was a final exam. Could you tell? Yeah, it's a little weird. We often get the worst exam time ever, which is December 19th, 7 p.m. on a Friday in December. It's so awesome. And they walk out smiling with a spring in their step. They thank us. They high-five each other. It's kind of weird. It's a little creepy, honestly. Yeah. Anything else people noticed? So they're sharing the answers. The group portion, they're doing the exact same exam as they were doing before. I'll explain a little about how it works in a minute. You had one back here? This is the first time I'd ever done this. And this is one of the times that I had permission from the group to video them, which is why I'm allowed to show this. I have permission from all the people. Anyone who didn't want to be videoed is in a section of the class that I never went towards on the left-hand side. And I tested it like that on purpose. I actually even had a long time for the exam and lots of room because I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I was a little scared. Now, I don't care. We do it in rooms of 500 with 500 seats in a 50-minute block. And the organization comes eventually, but it's a good observation. Okay, so what I want to do, assuming I can convince this thing to work, I think I'm blocking it with the water, is I'm going to go through a few things today. My plan is to define how we do 2-stage exams at UBC, to discuss, or to have you discuss, a little bit about what you think might be the benefits or drawbacks of these exams, and then towards the end, depending on our time, to discuss some of the literature around 2-stage exams, some of which I've been involved in, but obviously has gone way past what I do. So I want to start off with this. I want to do this with fingers. How frequently do you use group work or activities in your classes? This is 0. I don't use any at all. And it goes up to 5. I only interrupt the group work so I can make announcements for class. Does that scale make sense to everybody? So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and I want you to hold up a number of fingers between 1 and 5. Sound good? Or 0 and 5. 1, 2, 3. Got a bunch of 2s, 4s, 3s. You got 5? I'm giving you the 5. Okay, so that's good. One of the things that I would say is that this technique will work no matter what you teach like. If you do any activities in group discussion in class, then the assessment will start to look like your classes. And so it complements that very well. They'll be very used to this sort of thing, and it's a little easier to do this. Okay, this is working. So how many people in this room have used 2-stage exams or cooperative exams or some type? Awesome. I want everyone else to look for the fingers that are up in the air. Keep them up. Go and find these people and watch it. It's one thing to see me do it on a video here. Seeing it in person is very, very, very different. It is actually super compelling. And one of my colleagues did this in a class of 600 because she's a show-off. In a midterm, I think she had an hour and a half. And she turned around and her TA was crying. And she went over and said, "What's going on?" And the TA said, "They're talking about biology." Because one of the most compelling things is that these students are having animated, awesome discussions about your material that they care about deeply. I talk about landslides in my classes. The students are always doing this and pointing and arguing at each other. It's very rewarding as a teacher to see students using the jargon you taught them in class to have their discussions. It's just a supremely rewarding thing to do. All right. So at UBC, when we do these are a 2-stage exam, and the first part of it looks exactly like an exam. So the students do an exam like normal, and they hand it in. The only difference is we don't let them hand it in piecemeal. They all hold it until we're done the individual component. And we do this because if you take them in piecemeal, as soon as there's no exam in front of them, they will start whispering to their neighbor. And then the people who are trying to finish won't have time, or will be distracted. And so we take them all in at once. Once we've done that, about 2/3 of the time goes to the individual exam. It looks exactly the same. Then we get them into groups of 3 or 4. 4 is what I prefer. And this is what I do. We use a mix of ways that we create these groups. Sometimes the instructors create the groups. Sometimes they're just random. Sometimes the students choose the group. Because I deal with large classes, I tend to let the students choose the group, but you might have reasons to do other things. And then we give them this group exam, which is identical, or almost identical, to the individual version. The main difference is we give them one piece of paper. So they did it individually with 4, but now they have 1. They do the same exam again in a group of 4, but they have to agree with each other on the answers. And they don't have the out of saying, well, you choose C and I'll choose B. They have to talk to each other and they have to make that decision. The groups get that one exam. They have to come to consensus. The way I balance it, 85% of the marks, so the vast majority, comes from the individual component. 15% comes from the group. And if you beat your group, you retain 100% of your individual mark, which cuts down on complaints. Because people at the top end are generally the ones who would complain anyway. It's just they're the ones who care about their grades more. The other people are embarrassed. So these are very widespread at UBC, UBCV, UBC Vancouver. We have used it in over 100 classes, which is a little nutty at this point. All the sciences, but we've also branched out into forestry, pharmacy, psychology, land and food systems, political science, and I've lost track. It's at the point where it's gone way beyond what I know is happening, which is kind of cool. And we use it at a lot of different levels. So I've done it in 400 or 500 student classes. We also use it in labs, seminars, and I have a colleague who does it in his grad class. And the way I found this out, I was teaching about this in a teaching and learning class for graduate students in my department. And they were like, oh, 2-stage exams, these are amazing. I did one, it was awesome. And so I went and queried the instructor about it, and he said, oh yeah, I started doing it last semester, it's great. And so it's quite interesting. They sort of work at all sorts of levels. The one thing I will say, I tend to do it with multiple choice. That's not the only choice. You can do it with most question types. I would argue that you should not do it with essays. Writing an essay with 4 people under a time constraint is one of the levels of hell. And so, but anything else works. You do calculations, we do it in physics, we do it in math. Short answer, a couple paragraphs up to half a page, that works well as well. I've done it with drawing diagrams. All of these things work pretty well. One thing I will comment on, if you use these, it's worth having a discussion with the accessibility center at your school, because there are some people who get longer time periods to write exams. Generally, how we deal with that is that we let those people start the exam a little early. They do the exam at the individuality center, or the accessibility center, and then they walk over in time to start the group. They don't need longer to do the group exam. Because it's identical, they've read it already. We give students the option of being part of this. Some people have social anxiety and will not want this at all, but I think more than 99% of the students prefer to be part of the group and to come back and join their colleagues. So what I want to do now is have a chance to discuss benefits and drawbacks a little bit, but I want you to do that. So I'd like you to turn to someone near you again, and I will hunt you down if you're not doing anything. Have a quick discussion, groups of 3 or 4 or whatever. What do you think some benefits will be? Now, I know you're academics. You're very good at criticism. We'll talk about criticisms in a little bit. I will give you time to do that. But right now, I want you to talk about why you think this might be a good thing to do. Does that make sense? Go. Okay, everybody. So, sometimes in class what we say is stop learning and listen to me. Does anyone have an example of something they think might be a benefit for doing something like this? 1 or 2, go ahead. And no need to review. If you do a review, they actually get bored, which is interesting. Over there?
Improved retention.
Improved retention of material. One of the things I've learned about myself is that spelling in front of people is also terrible. But there's no red lines, so I'm okay. Yeah?
It can correct misconceptions immediately rather than having to wait to get your test back.
Yeah, so one of the best practices in teaching is feedback, quick feedback. So the quicker you can make feedback happen, the better the learning will be. And this ties into a few other things with no complaining and stuff like that as well. What else? Yeah.
It also gets students meeting each other and working together. And it seems like I've done this before, and it seems like I can just assign any 3 or 4 students, and they can work together.
Yeah.
It's a very a common goal, very easy for them to work together.
It's a common goal under a time constraint. And in a time when they sort of have heightened excitement and maybe terror for some people. Yeah. Okay. What else?
Helps end it on a positive note.
I talked about this in England, and they were able to do it in their midterms, but they would have to get Senate approval to do it in their final exams. And if I had to choose, I would choose finals over this. One for ending on a positive note. The other, humans are very susceptible to forget instructions. We talk about how we have bad memories. It's really important that we have bad memories. It's part of what makes us creative. It's part of how you know where your address is and you don't remember all the addresses you ever had. And so for me, putting a bit of social learning in at the end of the final exam takes away the forget instruction and makes people's brains hold on to it a little bit better. Okay. Other things? Yeah.
Complete answers.
You what?
Complete answers.
Complete answers? What do you mean by that?
I mean that if there's something missing, it's like, it's just like complete.
I'm going to add in here 4 is better than 1. It's a truism that 4 people are smarter than 1 people in general. And yes, one of the things people do, you'll notice I said it almost identical exams. Sometimes people throw on the type of questions that make students cry. And if you give it in an individual exam, they can't do it. But if you put it in the group exams, somehow they can find a corner to hold on to, and 4 of them will be able to do it when 1 of them can't, which is interesting. If you do that, you need to allow more time for the group exam, but it's kind of cool. Yeah?
Helps them understand the actual question. And sometimes you put keywords on and they give you the answer that's not what you're looking for.
One of the things the students report is that they understand how other people approach questions. And so you can learn from students who are getting the material better. Related to not complaining, it's harder for someone to just say, Brett is a jerk and he writes hard exams. Because they're in a group with 3 other people who did fine. So they have to confront that immediately in the exam. They can't just look at the number and say, I'm stupid. They have to go through question by question and say, oh, I didn't get that, they did. And that, well, it's a little uncomfortable for them, it's actually really good for learning. Maybe one more thing here? Yeah.
They have to communicate their understanding of the problems, their instruction.
So peer instruction and the fact that they get to talk. I mean, we were just saying this here. So that there's a truism that the person who learns the most in a class is the teacher. We're the ones who perfect the material in theory, right? And so anytime you give a chance for the students to teach each other, it's actually very effective. So I have a few things to add here. I suspect we've talked about some of them. These are not the right answers. These are things that have come up before. Improved learning. Articulating ideas deepens their understanding. You can build confidence for people who otherwise might not have it if they do a few exams and keep realizing, oh, I know what's going on and my colleagues don't. That's very effective for them. You develop community and belonging. You get a diversity of ideas and approaches within a group, which can be useful if you have a complex question. They obviously develop very important soft skills, talking to each other. You get that immediate feedback, learn if you're right and wrong. Widely reported in the literature is it reduces anxiety. I've seen some evidence of this. Mostly I've seen the opposite. I had to pull the second stage once because of a copying mistake that someone had made, and the class freaked out, which makes a lot of sense, honestly. They can solve more challenging problems. You can give them more difficult problems on the exam if you put it just in the group part. You can reinforce your practices if you have them talking in class and then they're being assessed while they're talking with each other. This is very effective. They get more grades. And my favorite is, you get to see intense discussions of your favorite material. One of the benefits of teaching is being able to explain the thing you love to other people. And seeing that is very rewarding. And then, as we said, leaving on a high note. So students really like this. I mean, here's 3 examples. Physics class by a colleague of mine, George Rieger. Students had 71% positive opinions, about 10% negative, and I guess there's some neutral in the middle. Mechanical engineering, 76% positive, 15% negative, but all of them were mild. And a nursing example where there were 98% positive for this type of testing. Very rewarding. I did a kind of cool assessment where when I first did this, I handed out a sheet of paper and 3 times I wrote on it, group exams are blank because blank. And I wrote that 3 times. So I wasn't trying to get just good or just bad. I was trying to see what they would say if I left them alone. Most people said 2 or 3 things. In a class of 100, we got 208 things that we would lump into positive answers. They were interesting. Notice, grades is 4th. Not what most people would predict. Most people would say that grades go up would be the highest for students, but not true. They said discussion was awesome, you learn why you were wrong, you gain new perspectives, better grades, you get instant feedback, a chance to review, you build your confidence, you understand questions better, you learn techniques from others, and then we had 27 people who said other. So that's interesting. I like that. It's nice to see that students are thinking about education in ways that I appreciate as well. What I love more is the negative ones. It's hard to come to consensus. Yep. Wow, that sucks. That's a great thing for you to learn. It's time consuming. This is true. I think this is one of the major drawbacks of it, but it's not a crippling drawback. There was unbalanced knowledge in my group. Yeah, there's unbalanced knowledge in your group. Maybe someone did more work than you did. I could be convinced of the wrong answer. Only 3 of them suggested this. We have evidence that this is really unlikely. And frankly, if they're walking out of the exam with 70%, then they already think of 30% of the questions incorrectly. I realized I did poorly as an individual. Also uncomfortable, but I don't think that's bad. And worth too much, I actually changed the value after this. I used to do 75%, 25, but I think 85-15 is more representative. So the students actually do quite well, and they really appreciate it, almost overwhelmingly. So now what I'd like you to discuss, what are some possible drawbacks of group exams? So chat with your neighbors about what you think maybe would be a reason these aren't as great. That make sense? Go. Okay. So if I could get you to finish up. Okay, so as we do this, we'll keep the list. I don't want to feel like you feel like I'm arguing with you, but we've probably overcome many of these difficulties. And they are difficulties, I mean, the things that come up. But so I'll sort of explain to you maybe why these don't bother me as we go along. But does someone want to start? Maybe you guys want to start? More marking. Question mark. So it's less marking, which is kind of magical. Because if you think about a regular exam, let's say you have an hour. For an hour, all of the students are creating paper for you, right? So you have 100 students, say, writing for an hour. In a 2-stage exam, that's true for the first half hour. But for the second half hour, there's only 1/4 as many sheets there. So there's actually slightly less marking, almost half as little marking for a 2-stage exam. That make sense? Okay, good. Next, yeah. Less time. This is true. And this is one of the things that is important. However, we're actually very set on how we do things. And often the things we do because we've always done them and they don't actually matter. So if you look into the literature in psychology, a longer exam is not a better exam, necessarily. And so you can overcome this a couple ways. One, you can just love the third rail and say, okay, my exams are shorter. And I have to be very specific about what I'm testing on and really know which learning goals I'm looking at and which misconceptions I want to see. The other way of doing it is what we did in one of my classes. The first time we tried this, we weren't sure if it was going to work because we were doing a 2-stage exam with 500 people in 50 minutes and we'd never done it before. And so we just added an extra midterm. So instead of having 2 midterms with 50 questions, we did 3 midterms with 30 each. So over the term, we did 90 questions instead of 100. That's not a big deal. And so if you're okay with letting go of a class, I mean, in Vancouver, we'd say it's a snow day, because you don't want to go in Vancouver when it's snowing. There's people out there with summer tires. And so, just decide what you would cut if it was a snow day and put in one more exam. But this is one of the drawbacks, so you have to sort of learn to deal with this. I have. Other drawbacks, yeah. Group formation, so much trouble. There we go. So there are people here that choose groups. There are people here that randomize groups, yeah. And I let them choose. There are really good reasons to choose groups and make diverse groups. You do not want to, for example, create a group that has 1 female or 1 person of color surrounded by 3 white males in physics, for example. So there's good reasons to create groups. If you do that and you tell them beforehand, it's not a big deal. With us trying to figure out how to place 500 people in a room so they could find each other, we decided not to do that. But there are certainly ways around that. But it's up to you about what things you think are important. For us, we've found that the 2 things that make me feel better about that is, 1, it's a short amount of time, so the groups are not that common. 2, that second problem of having diversity in groups. We've seen some anecdotal evidence that while certainly at the beginning they don't do as well, or they might beat their group, which means they might not be being listened to, but that they come up with strategies by the end to be listened to by the group, or the group realizes, hey, they keep beating us. Maybe we should listen to them. And so there seems to be some ways around it, but that's mostly been a personal choice in the way we do it. Yeah?
Just to make sure you seem to suggest that you're using the same groups
I do.
across the whole term.
I let them choose. I often do because they get better at working with each other. And usually students, once you break a social barrier, they never want to, ask your students on the second day of class how many of them are in the exact same seat. And you'll have, 50% of them put up their hands and 50% of them are lying to you. Right? Yeah?
If I could just give you a quick example, I have a class where I have a tutorial, and in the tutorial, all I do is ask eye-clicker questions.
Excellent.
They're all old exam questions.
Perfect.
Much of their marks, the average is always over 90%. Then I get to the exam where they write on their own, the average is 65%.
Yeah.
And what that tells me is that they're not really understanding. It's that when they're talking to each other, they're asking the smart guy what button did he push, and he's telling them.
Not necessarily, and when we look at that, it's actually rare that people beat their groups. If you have smaller numbers, if you have 2 students, it's very common that the person with the highest grade is the same grade as the group. But what we see when we average it out, yeah, but that's when there's 2 people. When there's 4 people, that doesn't happen. And so part of what we're trying to do is also break this down. So the trick with the iClicker thing also, one of the important things is whether, and you may be doing this, is whether you give them a chance to answer on their own or whether they turn to groups immediately. So best practices for iClicker is they think of it individually, then they discuss it. They answer, and then they discuss it again. And so this has that scenario. And so often what will happen in other groups projects is there's one person who drags everyone through the questions because they understand it and they read very quickly. The benefit of this is if you read slower or you think about the questions longer, you've done them by yourself in the individual exam, so you're ready to discuss them in the group, if that makes sense. So you might see differences if you do this. Other drawbacks, yeah? Without a phone. My God. So I often have a blank page and say, if you're bored, draw me a picture. And they write poems and stuff. It's Danielle, right? Yeah. You have can you tell what you do?
I add almost a joke level at the front, and just let them solve puzzles while they wait.
So students are actually pretty good at waiting in an exam situation. I have students who sometimes sit for 45 minutes in a final exam. But the benefit that we get at the end is worth it. Yeah?
One thing I tell my students they can do is bring a book from another class.
Oh, great.
Because they want to read it in that time frame.
Is that how you spell Sudoku? Yeah. Sure. Whatever. Bring a book. Draw a picture. The draw picture one is nice because they're always looking for something to draw and I'm pacing around the room. So I actually get all sorts of adorable little portraits of myself. So if you're an egomaniac, you might like that. My current favorite is on my wall right now. They did a cute little cartoony version that actually looks like me and is wearing the same t-shirt. I kind of like it. Okay, other drawbacks? Yeah.
I was wondering about a possible intimidation factor.
Intimidation.
Students lacking confidence.
Yeah, and just social issues. Sometimes we say dead wood or dominant personalities. So all of these are issues. Intimidation has more letters in it. All of these are issues. They're important issues, and they're actually important things for them to practice. So we talk a little bit sometimes before about how to work in a group and how to decide when, if you're in a group that you don't think is working for you, that you should leave the group because it's not effective. What I have seen, I'll tell you a quick anecdote about one that I did in that exam that I showed the video of. There was a group of 3, and there was a student who had taken the class, or a similar class, 6 years earlier, and he thought he knew everything. He didn't. I walked by them with the exam sheet and the bubble sheet, the Scantron, and I passed it to them, and he grabbed it and completely ignored the 2 women on either side of him. And on that group exam, the group got 71%, which was 3% higher than his 68. Both of the women got 85. They kept their individual marks because they beat their group. The second exam, I walked by them, and I had the exams, and one woman grabbed the question booklet, and the other grabbed the bubble sheet, and he went, oh, okay. And the group got 93%. And so they use strategies to get around it. But we do talk to people after the exam about if they aren't happy, whether they want to change groups, that it's something to discuss. And we often say when we're making the groups, if you have a group, great, we'll give you your sheet. If you don't, come to the front and we'll make groups. So people will just sit at the front and come up and join different people randomly. Yeah? No. I've had people try to leave the exam during the exam. Like they come to the front and say, I'm not doing the group. And I say, okay, well, you're losing 15% of your mark. I don't, if they beat their group, that's fine, but they need to participate in the group because I think this is an important thing. Nobody in their job goes into a room with a number 2 pencil and does a multiple choice test. They need to talk to each other. We're not about the hero scientist here. Yeah?
Can you talk about the logistics of a really big class that's full with no extra space? Like how do you have time for them to make their own groups? Like, I imagine it would take 20 minutes where there's extra people who have no one to...
Our best time is 3 minutes with 500 students. And so what we say to them is, first of all, we warn them this is coming. So we encourage them to sit near their group members already. We say to them, so we take in all the exams, we have people pass them to the aisles, the TAs run up and grab them all. We say, are there any exams left? And if there is, someone will put up their hand near them and we go grab that, because someone always thinks that they can wait to the last minute to fill out their bubble sheet, even though we've told them they can't 15 times. They can fill it out afterwards. Then we say, get into groups of 4. When you have 4 people, all 4 of you raise your hands in the air and a TA will give you the exam. It's really fast to hand out the exams because even with 500 students, groups of 4, that means 125 exams. If you have a 500-person class, you've got 6 TAs.
Once they form their groups and there's all the extra people left, where do they go?
So they come down to the front. There's usually a few spots available, but the people at the front, their primary thing is they go onto the floor. It's really weird. They want to do that. And they sort of stretch out and lie down, and so you have these images of them doing that, or they just sit where they can. There's usually an ability to get all the room. It surprises me. And some of them are in awkward positions, like you saw in the video, but they're only in that for like 15 or 20 minutes. They move around and sit. I like to think that the exam is a little fire, and they're all warming themselves by the knowledge. It works out pretty well. We maybe have one more of these. Yeah?
The registrar's office doesn't always like giving extra rooms for people to have their own exam room.
Oh, for the finals?
Yes.
Exam scheduling is interesting. Like I said, we have more than 100 of these now. We control the signal at this point. The accessibility office is very interested with this. Whenever you have students with accessibility, they email you in week 2 and say, will you have group exams? the scheduling office learned very quickly that you need to ask this. We do exams in the gym, and they divide it into 3 pieces with a curtain. I didn't do this, but someone didn't check on this and had a group exam going while someone else was trying to do their final exam next door. That only has to happen once, and it never happens again. So you just say, I need a group exam now, and they make sure that you're going to be fine. As long as you sort of make that happen, and if they give you another room, you have to try and reschedule it. But yeah. Just one more, yeah? Oh, do I ask for consent? I don't ask them for consent, but I warn them that I'm doing this. The person who does this best is my friend Tamara Kelly at York. She shows a video like what I just showed and says to the students, what are these students doing? This is an exam. And they all say, cheating. And she says, do you want to cheat on your final? And they all say, yes. And then we're done. I have another colleague who says, this will be the strangest exam you ever write. You will walk out of the exam with a smile on your face, having improved your mark. Students appreciate this, and they generally like it. We have other things. Some people think there might be extra anxiety around this. We've seen that anxiety is mostly reduced. There's obviously different communications with skills when you have English as additional language learners. That can be tricky, but we get around it, and frankly, it's good practice for everybody. Dominating personalities, dead wood. Some people worry you can be convinced of the wrong answer. I can show you that this doesn't really happen. Students might learn they did poorly. Again, I think this is a benefit. People worry about grade inflation. The grades go up about 3.5% on average, but you just make the exam 5% harder. So put in the questions that are a little more evil, and the problem is solved, and it takes extra time, which we discussed. So what I want to finish with is to talk about a few research studies and some of the literature on the exams that shows that this works. The thing I mentioned earlier, that correct individuals might be led astray, you can get over this quite quickly. My colleague Joss did a survey, all questions, whether they answered it correct individually or as an incorrect, and then what happened when they were in the group. So if they were correct, they were 97% likely to get the right answer in the group, and only 2% likely to get the wrong answer. So that's pretty rare. That's certainly random. But this is what's cool. 40% of the time they were incorrect, they were still 70% likely to get the right answer in the group exam. The coolest thing that happens, if you have 3 people that all choose the same answer, they say, oh, we're right, and they move on. So that sucks if they all have the same wrong answer. But if you have 4 people with the wrong answer and one of them is different, they are 75% likely to get the right answer out of that group, because they know why the other people are wrong. They just don't know why they're wrong, and then they go and look for other answers, which is kind of cool. This is some data that shows some of the differences between groups of 2 and 3. Groups composed of only incorrect individuals, so evidence of learning. So the group question correct after all the individuals were incorrect, so you can see about 30% was getting this. These are where I prefer to be. I like to have 4. This is one of my studies. They're 50% likely to get the correct answer when they were incorrect in that situation. One of the things people worry about that somehow it only is good for the students that are doing badly. We did our study, in our study we broke the class into thirds, people who were the lower third, the middle third, and the upper third. And what we have is normalized change from the individual test to the learning test. And you can see our group condition. No matter what level they were at, they learned more than a third of what they had gotten wrong. There's ceiling effects for this upper group, but they're still learning a lot of what they had wrong. And what's cool about that is the difference between a 92 and a 93 is very different than between a 52 and a 53. So these people are learning things that are very difficult and getting it right afterwards, which is nice. And you see a similar benefit over all of the levels. When you look at the studies in total, we see evidence of learning in the short term very strongly. So there's a variety of studies here. We've got an effect size here. The one I did, we had more than 10% difference in the scores for people who redid the test as a group. For a 20-minute intervention, that's almost unheard of. But the trick is that you're really leveraging their studying. But we see benefit in all of these ones, except for a couple here. Late in particular, I like to pull out because they didn't really do a group exam. They did groups of 2. And I think a group of 2 is too small. So it doesn't really work. In the long term, it's harder. Some people are worried about this. I worry about it less. There's a little bit of evidence. You can see a couple studies. This one in particular had some in educational psychology, less in 2015 for one of my friends in physics. This is harder. Human memory is a funny thing, and how students think about their learning is a funny thing. And so if you think about a student who's learned something really well in a group exam, when they go to study later on, they probably won't study that material as much. And so when you have people, when you're trying to use the final exam to show this, it's confounded quite a lot because studying normalizes the results. And so if you're doing this and you're trying to show a retention of learning and the students have done other things since your intervention, it's very difficult to find a signal. I suspect that this type of study won't be possible in classroom studies. It would need to be done in a psychological setting, in a lab setting. But there's hope, and frankly, even if it didn't, I think the benefits are there. I think that they do have better retention, and you often hear this anecdotally from students who will come up to you and say, oh, I remembered this from the midterm because we discussed it and argued about it. But I would do it just for the social aspects. So to sort of sum things up, when we think of these 2-stage exams, they are the highest levels of engagement that I have observed in any of my classes. You're looking at a situation where you have lecture, where people are sort of drifting in and out, they're on laptops and phones. Even when you're doing activities, there's people like today where you have to go and poke them to make them be in a group, things like that. Compared to the group exam where there's a huge amount of noise, almost everyone is talking. You'll notice this person isn't talking. And there's just a lot of engagement and sound and, frankly, learning. And even the shyest students will participate. One of my favorite stories is a friend of mine who had a student who never spoke up in the entire class. And in the final exam, she was leaning on the table, pounding at it, screaming, no, 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 to her colleagues who were going, okay, okay, we'll talk about this. And you get this involvement. And they don't have to talk the whole time, because even in a lot of situations, you'll see people who wait, but then they're the ones who make the final decision. That everyone else talks it out, and then they turn and look, and that person says, I think this. And that's what they write down. It's quite nice. And you see situations like this. So this is a lab class in a college. This is a physics class. And people just want to be near the sheet, because they want to see what's going on. Because you're asking them to think about the exam and review the exam while they still care what the answers are. Next week, they won't care. But in the moment, they care deeply. So I'll leave you with this image. This is 1,100 people in one of our gyms doing a 2-stage exam together. I will tell you that the sound in this room is staggering, absolutely incredible. Although each of the groups can hear each other and are happy enough with that. I regularly film. They don't look up. That's one of the things you might have noticed in the beginning video. I actually had a tripod and a camera and was walking around. None of them looked up. In that whole thing, I think at the very end, one student looked up and then went back to, right back to it. I will leave you with this image. I have in here, and the slides I believe will be available, some bibliography with a few different papers that have looked at this. But at this point, I'm happy to take any questions people have about 2-stage exams. And I thank you for your attention.
Do you care if students in one group talk to students in another group or overhear students in
You
another
mean
group?
if they cheat?
Yeah.
So we encourage them not to. It's painfully obvious when they do, because there's 2 groups that are really close together. And then the other funny thing is they take too long. So if you have a group of 8, they don't have time to finish. Interestingly, the students go past the ones that they all know. But if you have more people there, there's more likely that someone will get it wrong. So they stop and talk about every one that they get wrong. So having 8 people is a bit too many, and it takes too long to get through everything. So we care. And we tell them it's an exam and we walk around and police it, but we're not invigilating to the same extent. The interesting larger problem that we have is this one. So they're sitting and talking in the group just like they do in every class, and they do this. And you go up, is that a phone? And they go, like there's a snake in their hand all of a sudden because they're just so used to pulling up their phones. My God, they haven't looked at it for 45 minutes or whatever. And so we try to watch that a little bit because they pull it out by accident. But mostly it's not an issue, and we tell them that if you do a group of 8, you're going to be much slower. But you can tell if your group has that. But honestly, do I care? I mean, an individual, the average on group exams is like 92 for the groups. The group of 8 will get 93. At that level, they're running the barriers of what I'm thinking and what exactly I want, which is hard to manage. Yeah.
So it sounded earlier that you don't give the exact same questions on the group portion, but that they're slightly different. So how?
I do exactly the same.
You do exactly.
It's possible to add one more difficult question to it, and that's actually a way of dealing with people who are done early. You can put that on the individual exam and say, you will have to answer this as a group. But mostly I do the exact same, and the reason for that is what I said earlier. You don't want other students who read slower to be dragged through the exam. You want them to look at it and see the exact same question that they understood so that they can have a good discussion about it. Yeah?
I think you made a really good point here because you managed to engage all of us in your presentation.
Thank you.
So I think that's enough self-explanatory.
It's because I'm a bully.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I wasn't really sure what to expect.
Oh, good.
But what really strikes me about this is that what I see in your description is what I would have simply described as a study group.
Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
isn't that what we expect
Except
from students
it's
to
a
actually
little more intense.
experience in a study group, right?
Yeah. So it looks like a study group.
We did that. We fought and went, oh, this is right, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always awesome, but at the end of the day, we all learned from it.
Yep.
And so.
And often actually the study groups are the same as the group in the exam.
So why is it that it now needs to be transferred into, or why are we now transferring this into an examination?
Because they do the studying before the exam,
Right.
and then they get 70% or 60% or whatever on average, right? So they haven't actually made that transfer. It's afterwards when they go back and review it, and they go, oh, and that's when the knowledge sticks. So the human brain is awesome because it's when you make the mistake that you pay attention to it. If you get it right, you immediately just forget about it, you move on. So it's the
That's right.
mistake.
We never look at the right answers afterwards.
Right.
We always look at what we did wrong.
And so, but this is because it's afterwards instead of before. If the students formed study groups afterwards, then it would be great.
The process is the same, right?
Similar.
Yeah.
The wrong is in there. I mean, you will see your students walk out of any exam and turn to each other and say, what did you get for question 6? But they only talk about one question, the hardest one, or the one they found hardest.
Right, and it's only about the answer, not how to get there.
Right, and this, they actually have to have the discussion and they have to use the language of the course to have that discussion. So they learn to use the jargon.
I see the value, but
Yeah,
I
good.
just expect it to be done before the exam as well.
Yeah, well, they do. They do. Yeah?
So I have a question about the logistics of students who have extra time. Because typically they start writing at the same time.
Oh, like the accessibility?
Yeah.
We
So
start them early. So if we have an hour-long exam and they get time and a half, they start a half hour earlier.
Turns have to be done in class.
Yes, we do. And what happens is they either skip the class before them, or more likely, they don't have a class beforehand. So they don't always have classes before. So they will skip half of a class beforehand. Or if worst case scenario and they don't think they can do that,
So if they're writing somewhere else, they'll write.
and then come timed with a little time so they make it to the exam. Some people send TAs to walk them over to make sure they don't cheat. I figure the students who at the Accessibility Center have enough issues. They don't need us looking over them. They already have a Kafka's bureaucracy to navigate. And so we don't have trouble with that. And when I walk out into the hallway, they aren't madly studying their notes or something.
Do you tell the accessibility service people if they have to stay there for the full time?
I tell them to send them over as soon as they can. Because it's a long walk from our Accessibility Center to my building.
If your exam's an hour, they're getting 2 hours. So.
Well, if they're getting 2 hours,
Done.
so what happens is it's unlikely they will be done with like an hour to wait or something. Usually there's 10 or 15 minutes they sit there. But they're a very important group to concern yourself with. Yes?
Is there a special reason for giving 15% only, or?
instead of more. So the first time I did it, I did 75% individual, 25 group. And a student who skipped the last 2/3 of the class miraculously showed up for the final exam, got 35%, which is just beating the chicken with a pencil in its mouth, poking the page. And her group got nearly 100, and she got 47% in the course overall. And I went, ooh. You know, if she'd gotten 2% or 3% higher, she would have passed the course. And I realized 25 was too much. You just need enough that they're motivated. And I used 90-10, right? And they're still crazy. Yeah. I mean, I've said this today a few times. Students will murder their parents in cold blood if you give them 1%. And so the chance to get a couple more percent in an exam, they really like. Yeah, sorry, everybody?
Doing it for all the sections of your multi-course?
Me?
UBC?
Oh, yeah.
The only one doing it?
Oh, no, there's more than 100 classes doing this. And in the multi-section classes, it's usually the whole group doing it.
Yeah, because there will be comparison from one student to
Oh,
another, you know.
yeah, but honestly, if one person does it, and you go see it, and see the students discussing it, it's really hard not to want to do it. It's a very compelling experience. I really suggest, you've seen this, you might like it, whatever, go and see people do it. It's really amazing to watch it.
I'm puzzled with the multiple choice exam with 500 students as you mentioned. When you do it as a group, how do you pick the student number?
Magic. So we used to use Scantron Forms. In that case, we have a stamp. You can buy a stamp that every time you stamp it, sequentially goes up one number. And the question sheet we would stamp with numbers. And they would put that number on the group sheet and all their names on the question sheet, hand it all in, and the TA would spend a horrible hour linking everybody up. Now we use Remark Office, which is a program that you can get a license for the department, and you can create your own Scantron sheets. So I have bubble sheets that include 4 student number locations and then all the questions, and so the computer just does it for us. Crowdmark? Yeah. Yeah. Both of those are really good. Yes, sir.
So obviously, I get why you don't use essay questions. What about in-between kind of questions like short answer or say mathematical kind of questions?
Definitely.
To show your work. Is that okay?
Yep. Up to half a page, I would say, is good for writing. And physics and math use calculations all the time. Yeah. And you know, it's very common. Yeah.
What about students with auditory processing disorder?
So when we talk to students from the Accessibility Center, we give them 3 options. Right there and come and join us. Right there and take the average of group marks as your group mark without writing the exam. Or for very extreme cases, right there and have no relationship to anyone else. So if there are people who can't do the group exam, we will have accommodations for them. But we want to, in as many chances as possible, have them part of the group. And honestly, if there's someone who processes slowly, we've had people like that who would come and do the exam and would sit with their group of 3, and the group of 3 would very patiently explain it to this person. So if they're there doing the group work in the lecture, they probably can find a group during the exam. And
I was just thinking in more of like the background noise.
yeah, I haven't.
Have you ever had a couple, like a group where you're like, okay, you guys are group, you guys go to the small room.
I would do that.
Same noise?
I haven't had anyone complain. Something about it, it's noisy and it's a buzz when you look at it, but the groups can all hear each other.
Because I've had students in groups in class where I've had a student that
Yeah.
auditory processing, and they really struggle in a large active learning
So,
classroom with a lot of noise.
We would probably just encourage them to do it elsewhere, and we would encourage people to go with them if we could. Yeah, but I mean, with a lot of accessibilities, you have to do it bit by bit. It's one of the other things I study. I'm a geoscientist, and the normal way that we deal with accessibility, if someone in a wheelchair comes to your field trip, the normal geology response is, go away. And so we've been like working hard to try and say, well, no, it's actually really easy to take someone in a wheelchair on a field trip. You just get a bus with a lift. I mean, you're just standing next to a rock lecturing at them for 10 minutes anyway. I mean, if you did more activities, it would be harder. But, so we actually work very hard to incorporate those sorts of things, and that's one of the things that I mean, it's important to talk about that because it is a major problem. And if your accessibility center is not interested in helping you, that can be a big problem. But I know that they are here, so, because people deal with it. Yes?
Do students keep their answer between the two individual and group part?
Do they keep?
Keep an example of what they found?
Oh,
We do everything and
no, we make them pass it in because they would be tempted just to cheat.
yeah, no, of course, but like
You could, and I know people here do that. We don't. We make them hand it in and just remember. They usually remember the questions. And so it's not a problem.
Okay, before we finish, actually, I forgot.
Oh.